In 1644, Scotland entered the war. The Parliament had already signed an agreement with the Presbyterian Scots that they would accept Presbyterianism in England if the Scots would send an army to their aid. At the same time, a Scots nobleman, the Earl of Montrose, offered to raise an army for the king in the Highlands. The Presbyterian Scots were the first to send an army to England. While these negotiations were going on, Hull had been relieved, and Fairfax was busy raising troops in the West Riding. Strengthened by these extra forces, Parliament now began to plan an attack on the king. It was decided that Sir William Waller should attack Hopton in the west. The Earl of Essex and the Earl of Manchester should attack the king at Oxford, and Fairfax and the Scots should close in on the Duke of Newcastle. The attack began in the north. The Scots advanced first. The Duke of Newcastle moved to Newcastle, but as the advance continued, he fell back to Durham. Fairfax then launched an attack, and the Duke of Newcastle, fearing that he would be caught on front and rear, shut himself up in York. He sent for help to Oxford, and the king ordered Prince Rupert to go north to his aid. When the Earl of Manchester heard that Rupert had left Oxford, he suspected an attack in the eastern counties, so he set off north, taking Cromwell as commander of his cavalry. The Earl of Manchester joined Fairfax and the Scots in besieging York. The first shots fired by the Royalists on their besiegers were from Clifford's Tower, a strong point within the walls. As the siege wore on, food became short and there was talk of surrender. Then suddenly came news of help. Prince Rupert, who had swept victoriously through Lancashire, was advancing on York. At the news of Prince Rupert's approach, the parliamentary armies broke up the siege and moved out west to meet him. But Prince Rupert slipped past them and marched into York. Then, ordering the Duke of Newcastle to follow him, he led out the combined Royalist forces in search of the enemy. The two armies met at Marston Moor. From the cornfields on the hill, the parliamentarians watched Prince Rupert draw up his army in battle order. Prince Rupert's front line lay close to a ditch which divided the moor from the arable land. The parliamentarians drew up their army facing the moor. Prince Rupert's force, together with the whole of the Duke of Newcastle's army, faced the combined armies of the Earl of Manchester, with Cromwell as leader of his cavalry, the Scots, and Sir Thomas Fairfax. Some 40,000 men were engaged in this battle. It was 7 in the evening before the fighting began. Prince Rupert had decided to wait until the following morning for his attack, when suddenly the whole of the parliamentary army advanced down the slope to the ditch. On the left wing, Cromwell led a thundering charge against the Royalist first line. The Royalists wavered, then scattered to left and right. While Cromwell checked his charge, Prince Rupert, leading the second line, bore down on him. At sword's point they fought, hacking at each other, and then the Royalist line broke. Prince Rupert turned and fled up through Wilstrop Wood, with Cromwell pursuing him along the road to York. Meanwhile, the whole of the parliamentary army had advanced across the ditch. The Earl of Manchester had attacked and routed one wing of the Royalist infantry and was pressing down on the flank of the main Royalist army, which was already heavily engaged. On the right wing, the infantry had to advance up a lane before they could launch their attack, while Fairfax, leading the cavalry, charged over broken and uneven ground. The Royalist horse met Fairfax's men, checked and routed them, and some of the panic-stricken horsemen galloped through the lane, riding down the foot as they were struggling up. Whole regiments took flight or laid down their arms, and to this day local people still call this path Bloody Lane. Some of the Royalists pursued the remnants of Fairfax's cavalry or fell to plundering the baggage train, while others wheeled round and attacked the infantry. In the confusion, Fairfax made his way unrecognized through the enemy lines to get help from Cromwell. He found him reforming his men over near Wilstrop Wood. Hearing of the disaster, Cromwell ordered his men to ride round behind the enemy. Facing south, they charged and defeated the Royalist horse. And then Cromwell led a fierce attack on the remaining Royalist infantry, who were already outnumbered 2 to 1. It was the Duke of Newcastle's famous regiment of Whitecoats who made the last stand for the king. Beating off attacks from horse and foot, they retreated at last to Whitesight Close, where they died almost to a man. The king had lost the Battle of Marston Moor. The Duke of Newcastle's army was annihilated. York surrendered, and the whole of the north fell to Parliament. In the south, the king had had more success, but the defeat at Marston Moor proved a shattering blow to his cause. Out of the campaign of 1644 emerged the 4 great figures of the Civil War. Charles I, king of a people who were torn between a loyalty to the crown and their own love of liberty. Prince Rupert, a brilliant cavalry officer whose daring and courage were known throughout Europe. Cromwell, a country squire turned soldier who had taught his men obedience and discipline and had welded them into the finest body of cavalry in the country. Lastly, Sir Thomas Fairfax, a man who had been staunch in defeat as well as in victory. It was he who was chosen as Commander-in-Chief of the new army formed by Parliament in 1645. This army was called the New Model Army. It was formed partly from the old parliamentary armies and partly from new recruits. Cromwell was chosen as leader of the cavalry. The men of the New Model Army were well paid and well equipped. They wore one uniform, the red coat, and had to be ready to serve in any part of the country. Whilst Fairfax was busy training this new army at Windsor, the king was preparing a new plan for his forces. He hoped that Montrose would bring an army from Scotland, and that together they could attack and defeat the Scots in the north. He therefore set out northwards. When Fairfax saw the king had left Oxford, he advanced to besiege it. The news of the siege frightened the king, and he checked his march and moved east, waiting for a chance to relieve the city. It was only then that Parliament realized that the king must be defeated in the field before victory could be theirs, so they ordered Fairfax to break up the siege and pursue the king. The two armies met at Naseby. Here, on a hot summer's day, the king and Prince Rupert faced Fairfax and Cromwell for the last time on the field of battle. Although the king's men fought gallantly, the strength and resources of the new model army proved too great, and the Royalist army was completely defeated. Thousands of men surrendered, guns and ammunition were captured, and the king fled away to Leicester. After the victory, the new model army was ordered to search out and destroy the king's forces in the west. But it was not until the summer of 1646 that all the Royalist towns were reduced and the Western army completely defeated. When he surrendered the last of the king's forces at Stow-on-the-Wold, old Lord Astley, the Royalist commander, said to the parliamentarians,
"You have now done your work, and may go play, unless you will fall out among yourselves."
The story of how the parliamentarians did fall out among themselves is to be found on another page of history.